Okay, getting into my very favorite stuff, structures and functions of the brain. I want to talk a little bit about how the brain develops, and then after we have talked about how it develops, we'll start with the cerebrum. So, if you're looking at all of the structures of the brain stem down here, the diencephalon, the cerebrum, the cerebellum. This is an oversimplification, but it's a good way to start thinking about it. The newest, most human-like portions of the brain are on the outermost portion of the brain. So the very, very newest portion of your brain is the most superficial and most anterior portion of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. That is newest evolutionarily. It's also last developed embryonically and fetally. So, what does that have to do with functionality? These brainstem functionalities will be more life-sustaining functionalities that you would have in common with a fish, like regulating heart rate or regulating respiration or something. And then as you move in, these functions right here would be more like regulating homeostasis and sex drive, not necessarily life-sustaining, but longevity of the species sustaining. And then the cerebrum on the outside would be conscious activity and voluntary motor activity. So as you move more superficial and also more anterior, you get more complex functionality, with the exception of the cerebrum, which is kind of motor. It kind of develops, cerebellum, it develops kind of almost parallel to the cerebrum. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the cerebrum and we're going to move in from there. So let's start talking about the cerebrum. And the first thing is that the cerebrum is actually divided into a left and right cerebral hemispheres. And so you should be able to label left and right cerebral hemispheres. When you look at the cerebrum, of course, it is not color-coded like this. It isn't even this color in a living person. When you are actually looking at a cerebrum, and this is a fresh brain, obviously the person's not living at the moment. When you are looking at a cerebrum, what you are actually going to be looking at is really, really vascular pink tissue on the outside. We would call it gray matter, but when you're alive, it's actually pink matter. So this is a coronal section showing you the outermost portion of the cerebrum and how folded it is. So what you're looking at with the cerebrum is these characteristics, folds, these hills and valleys. So these are hills and valleys. And then you can see one basically canyon in the middle of there. So let's name the hills, name the valleys, name the canyon. So the hills individually are called a gyrus. That's a hill. It's an upfold. The valleys individually is called a sulcus. And then the plural of these is gyri and sulci, which most people don't say right, and I didn't for years, but gyri and sulci. And then this big canyon that divides the left and right cerebral hemispheres is called the longitudinal fissure. It's the only one you can see from this view, but there are some other fissures. So that's the longitudinal fissure. And just to put this together with stuff that we did in a couple of videos ago, the longitudinal fissure would be where the falx cerebri actually was before you pulled it out. Remember, that's that partition of dura mater that actually folds into the bigger portions of the brain. So the falx cerebri goes in there. And then, of course, right above that on the skull would be a suture, which suture would be almost just superficial to the longitudinal fissure. It would be the sagittal suture, just to orient you. Okay, so what is going on with the cerebrum and what is going on with the cerebral cortex? So the cerebral cortex, if you ever have a cortex and a medulla, the cortex is the outer portion and the medulla is going to be deeper. This is the gray matter that is superficial on the brain, and it's called the cerebral cortex. It's not very thick. It varies between 2 and 4 millimeters thick, and you can see it in a preserved brain here, and you can see it in a drawing there. That is called the cerebral cortex. And of course, if the brain was still alive, it would be nice and pink. One of the things that actually makes humans relatively intelligent and capable compared to some simpler organisms is not that our brain is bigger necessarily, but the amount of processing power that's in the cerebral cortex because of how folded it is. So, why would the cerebral cortex develop these folds? Well, if the cerebral cortex, if this portion is related to intellect and processing and thought, how do you get more processor without increasing the size of the head so that it couldn't get through the birth canal? Well, what you do is you actually develop a folded cerebrum. And someone actually made a really cool model to show how that folding actually develops embryonically and fetally. At about 20 weeks, a fetal brain has pretty much no folds whatsoever. And then when you're full term, you are going to develop quite a few of these folds. So that is a really cool, it's actually a model that they developed to do that. Okay, so what's the difference between you and other critters? It's not necessarily so much that your brain is much, much larger, because here's you and here's a giraffe. It's that there's quite a bit of processing power relative to body size. So let's look at a few things. Mouse, hardly any wrinkles. Rabbit, hardly any wrinkles. Goat, you're starting to get a few wrinkles, but still not very many wrinkles relative to body size. If we compare a human and a chimp, right? Quite a bit of wrinkling. But what about the human versus giraffe? Admittedly, humans probably have a bit more processing power than a giraffe. Although if a giraffe was giving this lecture, maybe there would be a different perspective. But the cerebral cortex, before it starts thinking about doing calculus or writing the great American novel, you have to use a bunch of that space for a bunch of the real estate in the cerebral cortex for conscious awareness of what's going on with your sensations that go to the cerebral cortex. So that takes up a bit of real estate. And then you have to use more of that cerebral cortex real estate for voluntary control of muscles. And then whatever you have left of the real estate, you can use to have anxiety. Now, let's look at the human versus the giraffe again and think about size of body and how much sensation is going to use up this real estate for a giraffe-sized body, and how much muscular activity is going to be controlled from this real estate, and then how much is left over for anxiety or calculus or writing a novel. So what it is really the amount of cerebral cortex area you have compared to your body size, which is not the exclusive, but a better prediction of intellect than is brain size. Okay, so what's going on in the cerebral cortex? Let's talk about what's going on in the cerebral cortex. So in the cerebral cortex, big picture understanding, this is the most superficial gray matter. It's 2 to 4 millimeters thick. It's on the superficial surface of the cerebrum. It is the newest portion of the human brain. It is where consciousness exists. It is where if I feel something, if it goes to my cerebral cortex, then I am aware that I am feeling it. If I am controlling something voluntarily, then it is coming from my cerebral cortex. And this is where all of your higher thought functions actually occur as well. So let's talk about the cerebral cortex with localities and divided into lobes. So let's go back to this figure for just a second and say, okay, so the cerebral cortex, this is just the cortex, is divided into lobes. Here's one, here's one, here's one. But if you look at a lateral view, you can actually see a couple more. Now, the thing that is challenging to students is to figure out where one lobe starts and the other, one lobe ends and the other starts. So let's find some landmarks for just a second. Okay, so the cerebral cortex is divided into lobes. I will bring some models for you guys to look at, but there is a big depression called the central sulcus. and everything anterior to the central sulcus, and you're seeing it right here, is considered the frontal lobe. And it's a much bigger area than just your frontal bone. So here's your central sulcus, and everything anterior is considered your frontal lobe. Now, not this region right here, because this region right here is actually your temporal lobe. So this is actually putting all of the relevant sulci in there. So let me show you just to make sure you can see it really well. Okay, so let us mark this one. Okay, so this sulcus right here, pretty easy to find on a model. That's called the central sulcus. Okay, this one right here, let me put that one in a different color. This one right here is the lateral sulcus. So everything anterior to the central sulcus and maybe superior to the lateral sulcus, all of this here is the frontal lobe. Okay, and the frontal lobe is the newest part of the newest part of the newest part of the brain. So it's the most anterior of the lobes. It's below the frontal bone, but then some more bones. It ends at the central sulcus if you go posterior, and it ends at the lateral sulcus if you go inferior. And what is the function of the frontal lobe? Well, you could go all day without getting all the functions, so I've just picked a few. So if you think of the boss of you, it's going to be your frontal lobe mostly. It is what we call your executive functions. It's the one that is in charge. The prefrontal cortex, which would be the most anterior portion right here that isn't even marked there, is the last portion that actually develops. So the prefrontal cortex is not actually completely developed until age 25-ish. And this is the site of planning and reasoning and judgment. Also, a lot of your personality is in there, intelligence, social skills. This is, for instance, putting off a short-term goal because a long-term goal is more valuable to you. This is predicting the impact of a decision you make today, 5-10 years in the future. This develops slightly later in males than it does in females. And the average age at which it develops is about age 25, which makes some interesting thoughts about the decisions that we make before we are 25. Okay, so that is the prefrontal cortex. And then this region right here, do you see this region right here that's in blue-ish? Right before the prefrontal cortex? That is a specific region that I want you to know that's related to the function of the frontal lobe as well. So you've got the prefrontal cortex, the whole thing is the frontal lobe, and then this region right here that's just anterior to the central sulcus. This is called the precentral gyrus. That's the location, okay? Precentral, because the central sulcus was right there. This is the precentral gyrus. And it is called functionally the primary motor cortex. So stick with me. So what I would say is it's the primary motor cortex and it's in the precentral gyrus. Okay. And what that is doing is it is your voluntary control. It's doing motor control, primary motor cortex, of limb movements mostly on the opposite side. Not only limb, but mostly on the opposite side. So I'm going to take a different picture and I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say they have mapped which part in that gyrus makes me do this, for instance. So stick with me. Okay, same color. Look where I am. Here's the frontal lobe. Here's the last gyrus in the frontal lobe called the primary motor cortex, right? And the thing is here that the right side of my primary motor cortex controls voluntary motor activity on the opposite side of my body. Okay, the left side controls voluntary motor activity on the right side of my body. that is for reasons I will explain to you guys later, but basically when the signal is going out, it crosses and goes to the other side. So what I want to show you is, again, with the real estate of the cerebral cortex, do you devote the same level of real estate for motor control of, for instance, your fingers and your skin of your bicep, or the muscle of your biceps brachii? No, your fingers have a whole lot more dexterity because they end up getting a lot more real estate. Remember, this is motor control, okay? So I want you to look. This would be in the middle of my brain, right? Right in the middle. So my toes, I'm wiggling them right now. I am actually doing that by actually starting that voluntary initiation of movement from the middle of the precentral gyrus. On the left side of my brain is making my right toes go. Then I've got a little bit of knee control, not very much. Then when I am actually doing this with my right hand, it's coming from about right here on the left side of my body. Okay, if I'm doing this with my face, it's coming from slightly lower down on the left side, precentral gyrus of my body. Tongue, slightly lower down. So notice that the amount of real estate in the cerebral cortex, and specifically in the precentral gyrus, we call that the primary motor cortex in the precentral gyrus, the amount of real estate it gets has to do with how much control, fine motor control you have over that. So that's called the primary motor cortex. Okay, and then there is a little area right here. Do you see this little area right here? Now this is pulled apart. Don't worry about that. We're going to do that a little bit later. This was, okay, one more time. This guy right here is the central sulcus. That's where the frontal lobe stops. The gyrus that's right in front of it is the precentral gyrus. It's where the primary motor cortex is. And then this little blob that's just anterior to the precentral gyrus and just above the lateral sulcus. So if you were looking at this picture, it would be right here. Okay, that is the first speech area you're going to learn about. It's pretty freaking cool. It's called the Brocas area or the motor speech area. So I want you to break that down before we go any further. Motor speech. So what it is me looking at a pen and being able to produce via motor activity the word pen. So pen, okay? Or motor activity to produce the word pen would also be writing, pen, okay? So it is responsible for producing written and spoken language. If that area gets damaged, what happens is you know the word in your head, but you cannot get it out. You can't necessarily write it dependably or say it dependably. When that occurs, it is called Brocas aphasia. Aphasia is a speech disturbance, and there's all different kinds of aphasia. But Brocas aphasia is, I know what you're saying, I understand what you're saying to me, I know what you're asking for, I might even be able to put all of the pens together with all of the other pens, but producing the word pen is motor speech, and I'm having trouble with that. So I'm going to show you a video of Sarah, who's much better now, by the way, who has Brocas aphasia, so that you can see how it actually impacts. Okay, this will go black for just a second, then it'll come back. Okay.
Are you an SLP who feels like you've been left to put it together all on your own when it comes to language?
Okay. So what's your name?
Scott. Oh, no. Sarah Scott.
That's right. And how old are you?
I can't.
Try.
I can't.
Oh. You're 19. 19.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what happened to you?
Stroke.
You had a stroke last year.
Yes.
And what happened? Can you remember what happened?
Um, School and English class,
Okay.
and I book and I read it aloud, but I can't because stroke, and so I send and also it's the same as the same of kind of thing as you know.
Pins and needles.
Yeah,
like pins
the
and
same, and also arm as well.
needles. Leg.
Yeah,
Leg.
yeah.
And what happened after the stroke with your speech?
Well, I can't.
You have speech problems.
Yeah.
Do you know what that's called?
Yeah. Aphasia.
Yeah, good, good. I haven't heard you say the word before.
I write it down.
And that helps?
Yeah.
Okay. So you are going to go to university. What are you doing now?
But
What do you do now? Every day?
I'll speech the speech.
Therapy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also riding.
Riding what?
Oh. Horses
Yeah, good.
and 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 connect.
Connect, yeah. You like Connect, don't you?
And it, yeah.
Why do you like Connect?
Aphasia, so I can the same kind of problems and speech, like yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that's Sarah. You can actually see her later as well. She got quite a bit better. She was 19 when it occurred, or 18 when it occurred, and she's 19 now. But what you can see with Sarah is that she's understanding the question, so it's not like a comprehension issue. And she knows what she wants to produce, but getting it out is problematic for her. Also, I wanted to point out that this Brocas area or the motor speech area is only, well, generally only on the left side in most of us. And so I don't know if you noticed in the video, but she also said that she was having pins and needles on her right side because the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So that's Brocas aphasia that you just saw. There's going to be another kind of aphasia that we learn that's a different kind of aphasia. So other frontal lobe functions. The frontal lobe also seems to be part of how we learn to empathize with other people. How I know that when you fall down, it might hurt you because when I fall down, it hurts me. And it's also part of how we learn by imitating others. So when a child watches you do something, you don't necessarily have to explicitly tell them to put the round block in the round hole because they will start to mimic what you're doing. And imitation is a really important part of learning. And it seems as if empathy development in neurotypical people is like an emotional mimicry. In people with autism, empathy doesn't develop in that way. It absolutely does develop in people with autism, but sometimes it has to be more explicit. So instead of just watching someone put the round block in the round hole, you might have to say, well, if someone falls down, then it would feel good for you if someone checked on you when you fell down. So maybe you can do that for that person, and then they completely understand the connection. So what you should do on this figure is identify as many of the things that we just talked about as you possibly can. Okay? And we will move on to the parietal lobes next.